We all know what type of season it is. It's the gift-giving season. And you know what gift was one of the ones that most impacted me over the years? 1986. Underneath the Christmas tree. I was actually staying at my aunt's house because our house was being fumigated. And you know what it was? A Nintendo Entertainment System. And welcome back to the heart of the stories we tell. I'm Rob the host, and this is another look deep into what makes a story, a theory on storytelling by a storyteller who believes that every story has merit. And tonight's episode is all about those classic video games. Now, the NES was not the first video game system I ever played. I did play Atari and I did have a ColecoVision, but for some reason, the thing that sticks out in my mind most for the switchover that made me a gamer was the NES system that I got in 1986. And hell, the more things change, the more they stay the same. As I'm recording this, look what's selling out in stores. So for the month of December, I'm going to focus on video games, and I'm going to start and end with the most classic of NES games. But first, wait, do I need to? No, screw that shit. I am not spoiler warning a 30-year-old story. It's just, like, statute of limitations, guys. But alright, let's get this started with Zelda, and let's pretend for a minute that it's not the oldest game ever and that there isn't 1,000 versions of it. This is the original. You remember this when you were walking into that cave for the first time? It's dangerous to go alone. Take this. This game was my first idea of what an RPG was, and my first example of what it was to play a game, and I've gone on to play games like it, Final Fantasy, Dungeons & Dragons, you name it. But you know what? This was all about exploration and finding and helping the princess. There were these hidden caves that were just full of cool loot and fun sub-games. Speaking of the loot, here's a full listing of what it was in the original game. You'll notice that over the years they've added a lot more to it, but at the end of the day, this is really just all you really needed. Magical boomerangs that froze people, magical shields, bombs to blow holes in things, and of course, candles and arrows, and the rings were to help you take less damage, and the power bracelet to lift things. I don't know where you carried all this stuff on that little pixel. I mean, seriously, where did he keep the raft? Where did he keep the raft? Alright, sorry. Personal problem. And all in all, this game was pretty fun. The creator of it said that he actually based it on when he was a kid, he would go out and explore. And he would go out and walk around and see what were in different caves in his home. Well, what you're seeing here is obviously a magical cave with a magical warp tunnel. But I mean, yeah, that's all this kid's really doing, is walking around and exploring, and there's a very basic story to it. But honestly, the basic story is just save the princess. And we've seen that 1,000 times before and since. You know what made it different? You could walk around this whole big map and go anywhere you want. And when you did, you found things. Like the labyrinths. And this is the first one. You go down into it, and boom, you're in your first dungeon. And you're walking around trying to figure out how to get through locked doors, how to beat the bad guys, lots of puzzles and tricks. And as you went, you fought these monsters that started out simple with things like these bats, and then as you got into higher levels, got way crazier, like this dragon. You dragon! And there were 9 of these things, and you went into them in order if you were smart, and you didn't even have the 9th one on the map. You had the others at least you could find easily. You had to actually explore and blow up this rock here to get into the 9th labyrinth. Man, I miss this game. I still play it every once in a while. But at the end of the day, the story was pretty simplistic, like I said. You went through and you were exploring. You had an evil wizard named Ganon who had kidnapped the Princess Zelda. And when you got hurt, there were fairies there to help you to heal up. And as you went, you collected weapons that were very specific to each dungeon and how to beat each individual guy. Here's Ganon, that evil demon wizard guy I was talking about. And basically, you just went around and fought him and his mooks, and when you beat him, you got a prize. And your prize was, yay, you rescued the princess. And you didn't really think about the history of the kingdom, although trust me, we're going to go into that. Because you see, at the end of the month, I'm going to talk about Zelda again, the way I am now. Except I'm going to talk about the whole timeline. And oh boy, from such a simplistic game, where all you're doing is fighting Ganon, and and shooting him with silvered arrows to kill him here. Pick up that Triforce. Yeah, let's just say the timeline is a little more complicated once you look at it. This is the first game that came out, but it's one of the last games in the series in one of the 3 divergent timelines. Yeah, I know, gets weird. But that's what happens as stories evolve. We started with these simple adventures, and we just built on them. And that's what you're going to find with a lot of these Nintendo games. A very simplistic story that, as it went on, just built more and more upon it. And there you go. Finally, peace returns to Hyrule. This is the end of the story. And this is the box it came in. Oh boy, do I remember having to hold down the reset button when you turned off the power button. There was another simplistic game I got back then when I got my first Nintendo, and it talked about 2 plumbers from New York who all of a sudden were gifted these amazing powers and were fighting for the Toadstool Kingdom. As far as simplistic stories go, this one is the bare bones minimum needed for a story. And the most annoying part was your princess was always in another castle. But at the end of the day, it led the way to creating video games that even to this day I'm still enjoying. However, I can't really dissect that story much. So instead, I'm going to switch over to 2 other games that came out with the NES. Ones that were less influential to me, but were way more influential overall in storytelling video games. And of course, I'm talking about Metroid and Castlevania, the Metrovania. Now, technically, the Castlevania they're talking about isn't the one that I'm going to be talking about. They're talking about Symphony of the Night. But you know what? It still had roots here. And when we talk about Castlevania, we talk about storytelling. So let's get into this. Meet Simon Belmont. Simon Belmont is the first in a line of Belmonts who hunt Dracula. Sound familiar? Sound kinda like Van Helsing? Yeah, well, it's a whole family line of Van Helsings. I don't know why, but for some reason this family line uses a very distinctive weapon. One that you might find a little funny, because I don't know, personally I'd go for a stake or something, but nope, they go for whips. And all sorts of different whips. The chain whip, the blessed whip, the leather whip, the long whip, you name it. And what you're seeing here is the beginning of the first game, where you literally walk into Castle Dracula. And once you do, the combat begins. It's rooms full of monsters. There's not a lot of choice, although there is some interesting choice. You can backtrack through this game, is one of the big things about it. Now, later on, we'll find games that you have to backtrack, that you have to go from one place to another and then back again to unlock secrets. But this is one of the first that did this. And it allowed for a storytelling element that doesn't happen very much in video games, at least pre this. You're not exploring like you are in Zelda, at least not the same way, but you're fighting through a dungeon that adapts to you and changes to you. And in the process, you're looking for pieces of different puzzles and weapons, and eventually you come across different mid-bosses. Each one a little different. You can choose which weapons you use to fight them. You have all these secondary weapons like daggers that go straight, axes that go up, stopwatches that stop time, holy water that are explosive grenades, and different ones you can fight using different tactics. As you can see here, the axes allow you a more upward arc when you're fighting the bat. Once you beat them, you get a power-up, which is basically the RPG element of leveling up. Now, that's not to say that it's seriously a major in-depth story. At the end of the day, you're fighting a vampire because you're just fighting a vampire. It just happens to be Dracula. And the gameplay is really just as much a platformer where you have to jump and dodge the bad guys as Mario Brothers, but instead of jumping on top of them to beat them, you're using your whips and your axes and your swords, in this case the cross, that kind of like a boomerang, like Zelda. And it doesn't have the ability to have as much depth of equipment as the Zelda series did, but what it lacks in that, it more than makes up for in base concept. And of course, there comes the point where the platforming ends, and you come to the final room, and I think we all know who the bad guy is of Castlevania. Say hello to Count Dracula. Now, in later installments, especially Symphony of the Night, we meet his children as well. But he's been the scourge of the Belmont family for years, and you're going to see over the course of multiple games that the Belmonts are the only people who can fight him. Once you do beat him, of course, there is a payoff, because at the end of the day, even though they were only paying lip service to story, the fact that you beat Dracula is important. The fact that his castle is gone, and the world is safe for at least a time. And that's one of those things that you do in these heroic journey games. But from there, we're going to go from the badass male protagonist who fought and defeated Dracula, who you played an important part of the story, and we're going to go to someone else. We're going to go to Samus Aran, someone who has a little bit of a difference in her characterization. And before we get into the Metroid part of it, I just want to say, when I was a little kid, the idea of Samus being a woman totally blew my mind. The story starts off pretty simple. You go to a planet, gotta destroy the bad guy, pretty straightforward. They have these hidden power-ups that you have to find in order to get through the game, and when I say hidden, I mean friggin' hidden. You have to figure out where to blow up parts of the wall. Who knew how to blow up parts of the wall? And there were no maps. You couldn't just Google how to get through this. You had to know, and you had to figure out, and you had to explore. And you know what? Those bad guys were hard. And you know what the worst part was? Every time you died, you needed to copy down this code in order to continue. It was crazy. But right away, you're hit by the music, and the feel, and everything was done as a psychological ploy to make you feel alone. I've heard a lot of examples given where it was compared to the movie Aliens. Well, Alien, sorry. And I can't say that I don't feel the nostalgia for Alien when I play the game. Now, as you can watch for in a second, the game gets kinda deadly right off the bat. You go from one or two monsters that are pretty easily dodged if you use the train, to bunches of monsters that are moving in different patterns. Things falling from the sky, things crawling on the floor and up walls. And this is, again, just right at the beginning. And again, there's no map, there's nowhere telling you, hey, this is where you have to go, and you're already running into all these guys. And you have to just kind of go with the flow. Where Zelda was about exploration at your own rate, Metroid is exploration as your only way to advance. There's no points being scored, there's no levels being gained, it's just find your way. And if you accidentally find your way to something you can't handle, well, tough teabags, you can't handle it. And if you want to talk about replayability, look at the search function here. You use the bombs to find a hole, and then you have to continue to bomb just to find a path forward. Well, down, I guess, would be better suited for this. Just so that you can find the next power-up. Just so you can fight the next boss. And you can't just keep gunning and shooting, because you don't have enough energy, you don't have enough missiles, and these bad guys are going to just keep coming. And when they do, you're not ready for them more often than not. So eventually the story brings you to the main bad guy, the Mother Brain. And you fight Mother Brain. And you know what? You'd think in any other game, at least back then, you beat the bad guy, you go home, you get the princess, you're happy, yay you. But Mother Brain isn't really just the end of this game. Because you see, there's a twist when you beat her. And I won't lie and say Metroid's the only Nintendo game that did it, because I can name a few others. In fact, we might cover them someday. But you have to escape. That means you have to go back through the entire level you just did until you get to the end. And then, of course, at the end you get the, oh, hey, it's really Samus, and Samus is a girl. So what do these games that are all 8-bit classics tell us? Well, they tell us about the legacy of the story, because you see, way back when, these stories were very simplistic, and they were very straightforward, and they were really just excuses to play the game. But every one of the games I've mentioned, plus many I haven't, have gotten sequels, and you know what those sequels did? They expanded the story in major ways. They brought about new ways to talk about these characters. And each one of these could be an entire episode in and of themselves. The Metroid series, the Castlevania series, even the Mario Brothers series, but especially the Zelda series. So keep tuning in, because at the end of the month, we're going to talk about the Zelda timeline and everything that goes with the legacy of the NES. So for now, I need you to like, subscribe, and share this video so that we can grow this community, and then join me back here next time as we take a walk through the heart of the stories we tell. Thanks for watching.